So I grew up with kind of awareness that a lot of my contemporaries, as a little white kid from North London, wouldn't have had. My horizons were broadened. I was eating things other people weren't. Bigger Lasher, my foster dad would go to Ghana, as often as they could afford, and he'd bring back mangoes and sugar cane, and I'm sure you're not allowed to do that anymore. Brought up eating Gary Frotter and jollof rice and food that my contemporaries wouldn't necessarily have known about. So I saw the advantages, and I think I've always looked at my life like that. What good can I take out of this? Yeah, there were times there was a reason I was taken into foster care. There was a reason my dad was 20 years older than my mum and he was in his 52 when I was born, my natural dad. There was a reason I was taken into foster care. They couldn't bring me up for quite a long time, but you can focus on that, or you can focus on the advantages you got of it. And I've still got my siblings. Both my natural parents are dead, and I've still got my foster mum and my siblings.
From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Our guest in this episode is Zenna Hopson, CEO of Dallaglio RugbyWorks. Zenna has established herself as an innovator and entrepreneur working to establish her own companies and invest in others. Her current role as CEO of RugbyWorks draws on her experience increasing revenue, maintaining education regulation, and developing CSR practices in the private sector. During the episode, we discuss Zenna's early life and business ventures and her journey to become chair of Ofsted. We also hear her take on sport and physical activity in education and the current curriculum. Enjoy the show. Yes, I'm delighted to be joined by Zenna Hopson today, CEO of Dallaglio RugbyWorks. The foundation is active across 8 regions of the UK and working to upskill young people, preparing them to achieve great things in their lives. And in addition, Zenna is an entrepreneur, investor, certified mediator, and also a regular columnist and commentator for The Guardian and Sky News. So welcome to the show, Zenna.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, me too. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and hopefully we'll do it justice and do our best to cover kind of your vast experience, obviously including being ex-chair of Ofsted. Loads to get into, and what we normally do is start with kind of take things back to get to know you a little bit better, take it back to the start, if you like, and kind of ask you to, if you can, how would you describe your childhood?
I had a brilliant childhood. Not conventional, I would say, but absolutely brilliant. I was born in North London in the Whittington Hospital. I was going to break into the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but I managed to stop myself. But I didn't move in with my auntie and my uncle, but I did move in with a family down the road when my own parents couldn't look after me. So I was privately fostered by a family down the road, which gave me siblings that I wouldn't otherwise have had. And our childhood, and then I went back with my natural mum and dad and moved to Cornwall to do my end of my teenage years in a tiny village in Cornwall where my youngest foster brother came down and lived with me. So bringing our childhood, we were out. You only came home if you were hungry. I was born in 1965, so sort of grew up in London in the late 60s, early 70s to mid 70s, and we were out.
So active, just playing out. You could play outside and
Yeah, just out. Well, our house backed onto a woods. We were out. We roamed around. I mean, I couldn't ride a bike because I'm, kind of missed when I clapped. I was not a particularly well-coordinated kid, but we were in the woods climbing trees. It was fantastic. And I really, really enjoyed it. And my natural parents lived just up the road, so I saw them all the time. I didn't have that sort of terrible separation that foster kids often get.
Yeah, how was that for you? Did you not feel, foster, being away from your family, I know you're close, did you think it had a bit of an impact on you at all? It must have had some type of impact on you, or didn't really affect you?
I didn't know any different.
Yeah.
Every Thursday we still went back to my natural mum and dad, me and my foster brothers. My sister's quite a bit younger than me, but me and my foster brothers would go up the road to my house for egg and bacon flan and tinned fruit salad every Thursday, never deviated. And the rest of the time we were 10 doors down the road. So I didn't know any different. I do know that looking back, it gave me massive advantage in my life. I was brought up in a family where my foster dad was Ghanaian. He died of COVID at the start of this pandemic.
Sorry.
My foster dad is Ghanaian and my foster mum's North Londoner. So my siblings, mixed heritage, mixed race. And so I grew up with kind of awareness that a lot of my contemporaries as a, little white kid from North London wouldn't have had. My horizons were broadened. I was eating things other people weren't. Bigger Lasher, my foster dad would go to Ghana, as often as they could afford. And he'd bring back mangoes and sugar cane. And I'm sure you're not allowed to do that anymore. Brought up eating Gary Frotter and jollof rice and food that, my contemporaries wouldn't necessarily have known about. So I saw the advantages. And I think I've always looked at my life like that. What good can I take out of this? Yeah, there were times there was a reason I was taken into foster care. There was a reason my dad was 20 years older than my mum and he was in his 52 when I was born, my natural dad. There was a reason I was taken into foster care. They couldn't bring me up for quite a long time. But you can focus on that, or you can focus on the advantages you got of it. And I've still got my siblings. Both my natural parents are dead. And I've still got my foster mum and my siblings.
I guess that brings a totally different perspective for someone growing up, and you see, opens your eyes, I guess, to other cultures and things like that. How was school for you then at that moment, at that time, coming up through school? And obviously, we always focus on, for our listeners, obviously, especially they're in the sports sector, so we're always focusing on kind of the impact of sport and PE. But I mean, in general, how was school for you growing up in the early years?
Really, I couldn't read a word till I was 12, so I didn't read throughout the whole of primary school. And so you get to be very good at being the class clown. Yeah. Reading the signals, guessing what the story you're supposed to pick up and read from the book might say.
Is that kind of the smoke and mirrors? Because I'm assuming getting all the way through school without being able to read, teachers would have flagged it or not? Was it kind of?
Oh, they certainly. Does
that make sense? I don't know if it.
Yeah. In year 2, spending a lot of time in a cupboard telling stories into a tape because my teacher didn't want my imagination to be crushed because all my contemporaries could read and I couldn't. And I couldn't really read and write. I read my first book. But I couldn't even read the back of the cereal packet. So yeah, it's smoke and mirrors. You become the class clown. You get very good at reading cues. So I could spot from the teacher's body language at 100 yards if I was suddenly going to be asked to do something that involved reading. So, that would be the moment I would lob a pen at one, because I was in the same year as my younger brother. I would lob a pen at Sam's head to cause a mass destruction or, pinch a fellow student so that there'd be a rock in the class, anything to avoid being caught.
Distract them, yeah.
But also I was one of those slightly unfortunate kids that I think now I'd probably have been given a diagnosis of something like dyspraxia because I really did miss when I clapped. And, my foster mum came out and she still tells the story of me trying to do hopscotch and her yelling at me, "You have to put your feet down," as I let myself in the air and sort of fell straight to my face. Catechismically useless. Art, really no hand-eye coordination, dreadful. And I did actually have a problem with my ears. So I was actually partially a bit deaf, but I was totally tone deaf. I can't hold a tune in a bucket. So I was one of those all-round, utterly useless kids. Completely useless. The only thing I could do, and for some unknown reason, is I could stand in goal and do reasonably all right. So football was the only sport that I engaged in. And then as we got a bit older, it was quite handy to have a girl, particularly as she started to develop, shall we say, and the girls came on board in goal because none of the boys in the team would ever want to strike against you. Right. So I wasn't actually as unpopular as I could have been in my footballing days. But I've always loved sport from a part, I'll have a go at anything. Useless. Apart from football goalie, you wouldn't want me on your team. I was always good at swimming. I could swim. And then, it's now called Greg's City Academy in North London. It's not an illustrious centre of learning. That was a secondary school we all toddled off to. And they had some sort of opportunity for us to do some fencing. And it turned out I wasn't bad at fencing. And then I carried that on when we moved down to this little rural school in Cornwall. But no, my schooling was an all-round centre of failure, really.
Looking at the positive side, so what was it like moving out into Cornwall then? Was that a big change, obviously, from North London to Cornwall? Was that a positive, getting out into the countryside, or how did you feel about it?
Looking back, having had that opportunity to actually, and I think my brother would say the same thing because he came down a year after I'd gone down there. He came down and joined me in Cornwall. And I think we'd both say the opportunity to really experience rural life overall was positive. He went on to agricultural college and farm for a few years. And he was actually the first black farmer in Cornwall, whoever professes to be, he was, and went down and did farming down there. But I've got to be honest, when I got down there, I absolutely loathed it. It's
Cool, a bit of a culture shock,
rural,
is it? Yeah.
closed-minded, and because I'd gone from a big comprehensive where actually if you were not very academic, you could hide, I was suddenly front and center, and I wasn't a great academic kid. I didn't have friends down there, and if it wasn't for the lovely Sophia, who I'm still friends with today, who hooked up with me in I think we were year 3 then, as it was known, which would have been year 9 now, I would have been absolutely miserable, and I would have just gone back and lived with my foster family, because I went down to Cornwall with my natural mum. But having met Sophia, she was cracking laugh and taught me how to really, and you can have fun in Cornwall. Yep, here, look at this deserted Mini. You can drive it round fields and try and kill yourself. There is fun to be had in the country. Fun we did have, but I never got on a footing with school. I did get thrown out, and I was allowed to go back and sit what were O levels then. Not right. GCSEs, that's how old I am. And I did get one. I got a B in biology O level. That's my illustrious qualification.
It's interesting. I mean, we'll probably maybe get onto this later on, talking about your time at Ofsted. But I guess I'm interested. Do you think that your experience would have been different if you were at school today? Do you know, like the challenges you faced then to now? Like you said, maybe got diagnosed with earlier, or have a different experience from teachers, or different outlook on teaching. That makes sense.
I think it would depend on how lucky I was and which school I got into. Certainly, there are schools now that are very good at dealing with very energetic, very active kids who really struggle to engage with learning. I did get a diagnosis of dyslexia in London. I think I was probably one of the first kids in '76 to actually get diagnosed with dyslexia. An amazing psychologist called Mary Gardner, I actually remember her, because it just wasn't a thing then, or not a thing in the same way as it is now. And I think there are amazing schools and amazing teachers, but equally, my own kids who, the youngest is 22, so they're not in school now, but 2 of them did struggle to engage with learning in the formal sense. And no, I'm not sure they had a better time than me, actually.
Because you always want to think like it's progressive, aren't we? We're always getting like continually improving and feel like it would be better now. But is it still kind of a postcode lottery kind of thing in terms of where you find yourself at school?
Yeah, and there are fantastic schools, and I saw that in my time in Ofsted, where the schools absolutely understand how to put the learner at the heart of what they're doing, and to teach them in a way that they're able to engage, and to drag them kicking and screaming through a curriculum that isn't really designed for the 21st century, let alone for a young person. It's not actually designed for anything anymore. It should have been relegated back in 1952. We should have moved on since then. But there are certainly absolutely brilliant schools, but there are schools that still really do struggle, and they are, not able to cater for individuals with particular special needs. And so you do get put into the exclusion units and the withdrawal room, the isolation units, the exclusion units. You start on that path. And some schools are brilliant and some aren't. I would say the majority are good now, and there is more understanding, I suppose, but I wouldn't guarantee that I would get a better run at it now. And certainly in Dallaglio RugbyWorks, where I work now, and we work in pupil referral units, the number of young people we see who have been let down by mainstream. Yes, it's easy to blame the young person. You're naughty, you were rebellious, you were constantly in trouble, we threw you out. But then when you look at the context of the upbringing that they might have had, the lack of protective factors that they've had in their own upbringing, and the fact that mainstream school has let them down, it's not all roses and cream. Roses and cream, that would be a really weird thing, expression. Yeah. Peaches and cream. Peaches and cream, roses and cream.
Like listening to your story, it's almost like a textbook or kind of all the trends, all the kind of flags or warning signs, I guess you'd like to see for someone who's going to end up being an entrepreneur, kind of that kind of, do you get what I mean? All the kind of stories you hear and your experience and the things you were exposed to as an early age. Did you always have that in you, kind of working outside the system and creating your own path or your own vision for how you wanted to, I guess, get on in the world?
Yeah, I think what I've always had I've got a couple of superpowers probably. My first superpower is I can read a room. Because I couldn't read a book, you learn to read a room. And that's my first superpower. My second superpower is I'm very good at finding really brilliant people. So at 15, 16, I've been thrown out of school. We're in Cornwall, Penzance, which has huge areas of deprivation, and there are a bunch of us kids who knew that we were destined for unemployment. Farming was was going because big machinery was coming and the mines were closing, just pre the miners' strike. But it was, the writing was on the wall. Tin mining in Cornwall, obviously coal mining further up the country you go. The mines were closing and fishing was becoming much more automated and bigger. What on earth we were going to do for jobs? And so a group of us got together, and with the help of a brilliant youth worker, and decided we were going to set up an unemployment centre. We raised money for it, no hardship here. We got ourselves together an inflatable, and there were several people who were very musical and very talented. I was not one of those. At best, I was the dancing bear. But we went round to festivals and ran kids' entertainment and raised money. And we persuaded the Manpower Services building and Penzance Council to give us a building on Bread Street. So when we got that, we got Manpower Services to do up the building. And we opened Bread Street Breadline. God, we thought we were clever. Nice. An unemployment centre for young people. And this must have been in 83. And it's still there now. And it still runs. And when we opened it, it had a band practicing room, photography suite, art suite, cafe, obviously, because we never thought of it as a charity. So it was always run as a business. But we also had things like, in there then, they had something called the Claimants Union. You now go to the job centre and have a benefits office. Then you had a Claimants Union. You actually had rights as somebody who was claiming unemployment. And we ran workshops from there. And it was set up by a bunch of kids so naively, because we didn't understand what charity was, that it actually had a self-sustaining model. And it would today be known as a social enterprise. Yeah. So yeah, I think we, as kids, always had that bit of grit that we would get something done. But I didn't then go and set my own thing up. I went and worked with young people in a therapeutic community, residential therapeutic community, as an alternative to custody or long-term psychiatric care. Right. Which is where I actually got some training in sort of understanding group dynamics and group therapy, and got a bit of counselling training and things. And didn't actually set up the first thing till probably 92 was the first thing after Breadline. So I went back and set something up. But I guess the spirit was always there. Yeah, I like that entrepreneurial spirit, but also it feels like, kind of looking at your path there, so much variety in your career, but you've got kind of that theme running through it where you want to, I guess, support young people, or tell me if I'm wrong, but it feels like that's the theme, helping young people to achieve their potential. I don't know if that's what you'd say. Yeah, I've done things that have deviated somewhat. That is my passion. That is what I have always loved. But throughout my career, I've done things that have, inevitably deviated from that, where things have interested me. But my driving force is, can I make a difference? Can I, contribute something positive to this? And if I can, I'll pursue it. So, some of the stuff, that I've done is not directly related to young people, but in most things I can relate it back to thinking, yeah, I can see this could have a benefit for young people. You did go to university as well, right? So you studied on the South Coast as well, or not? I was delighted to get an honorary doctorate from Portsmouth University. I had actually been studying a PhD in social enterprise. Right. But the honorary doctorate came along before that final dissertation was ever completed. Well, actually, the dissertation was completed. There was a whole story with a supervisor, etc. But I've got an honorary doctorate from Portsmouth University, so you may call me doctor if you wish, but I ain't going to treat anything if you're ill. No, I did try and do A-levels. I didn't get any. I studied some, but I never passed any A-levels. I never got a conventional degree. At that time when you were studying, is this the same time you were setting up the unemployment centre in Cornwall? Yeah, I went to Camborne Tech. So you got college age, so like 17, 18 years old, right? And from there, did you have kind of a vision for your career? I don't know if you think, right, I want to be, this is where I want to get to, because I'm trying to, that journey to becoming chair of Ofsted is like, it's really intriguing to me. I'm still on that vision. When I didn't pass my A-levels at Camborne Tech, I did get something called a certificate in social care. I mean, I always knew I wanted to work with people in particular, but I've always been fascinated by the law. And I sort of thought I'd either go to university and do a degree in law or a degree in social work. And I'm 56 now, and I'm still on that gap year. And I've now realised I don't actually need the A-levels to go and do this degree, but I'm just waiting to find the time. And then what happens is you get a job, and then you get a house, and then you get first you get somebody else's kids, and then you get your own kids, and then you get other people's kids again, and there's always the need to earn the money. And so I'm still waiting, but I've got a long wait, because I don't actually pay off my mortgage until the day before I'm 75, so I suspect the degree will hit in about 75. In terms of, and I don't want to cut massive chunks out of the journey, but really intrigued in the kind of the journey into becoming that chair of Ofsted, and how did that come about, and why did you want to take that challenge on at the time? So I set up something else again in 92, then had a brief spell working as a chief officer for a local authority, starting off with youth crime, but then looking at the whole of a city and how you can reduce crime across the city. And then I'd set up another sort of what we now know as a social enterprise, which is still going again today. And then I sort of took a step out of that, which is why I say there's sort of always been a tangential link to young people, and set up a consultancy business that did a whole range of things. One was about sort of evaluating impact of social measures, and that a really great colleague of mine did, although, you know, I'd sort of set the company up. She's fantastic. And then sort of looking at how you support and develop social enterprises, and another colleague, and he's fantastic, sort of did a lot of that. And what I did was sort of corporate social responsibility with big blue chip clients. But because it was a consultancy, you're not sort of confined to 9 to 5. So in about 2001, I took on, just applied for the job. Somebody told me about it, the opportunity to be the chair of these new things in 2000 called Primary Care Trust in the National Health Service. And I toddled along for the interview and sort of interviewed. And at the end of it, this very famous guy called Sir William phoned me up and said, yeah, we'd like to actually offer you the chair of Portsmouth City Primary Care Trust. Marvellous. I said, you know, you were picking your fingernails throughout the interview. Why on earth did you appoint me? And he said, you were the only candidate that didn't bore me. And I was thinking, dear God, what did he do to the candidates that did bore him? Because he sat there totally disinterested throughout my
maybe
interview.
went to sleep or something. Yeah.
But that gave me some exposure to sort of chairing, running, developing, building sort of quite big public sector stuff. And then I went into Turnaround, an organisation that got himself into a regulated business that did housing and property development and housing management. And it got itself into a bit of bother with the regulator. And I got appointed, obviously applied and got appointed to turn that round. And so I'd sort of done those sorts of things, done some big public sector stuff. I saw a job in the local paper for something called being on the board of the Royal Navy. I thought, oh, men in uniform, why not give that a go? So I applied and went through a rigorous process and got that. So I think what led me to Ofsted is the headhunter phoned me up and said, I can see you've got a strong background and in one of the businesses that I'd set up, we'd also run some pupil referral units. So I had a bit of education experience, some big public sector stuff. And the headhunter phoned me up and said, look, we're looking to recruit for chair of Ofsted. Poor woman phoned me about 4 times. And eventually I agreed to go and meet her for a preliminary interview. And I have never, I mean, that headhunter, wow, I'd never been put through my paces like that. 2 hours. She picked me apart. She took out my bones. She sat them clean and put them back. I still feel even today she knows more about me than I know about myself. Anyway, she put me forward to the interview panel and I toddled up for the interview. And that's, you know, I think it was as much about my ability to be able to bring 4 inspectorates together successfully and set up good governance, good systems, good processes than it ever was for what I knew about education. Because clearly, I mean, although, yes, I had taught at FE for a part-time point, and yes, you know, I probably could still just about get you through a business studies curriculum at BTEC or A-level if I absolutely had to. You know, that wasn't my background, but we were bringing in children's social care inspection into Ofsted. We were bringing in the court welfare service. We were bringing in adult learning. So I probably knew more about the other 3 inspectorates than I actually did about Ofsted, the traditional schools inspectorate. But the privilege it gives you when you're there to go out and see inspections and go and visit over 100 schools and really understand what's happening in teaching and learning. And that reignited my interest. So I got back in and as a practitioner doing some more stuff myself. And we did some amazing things. You know, we did actually save a lot of money, introduce new inspection regimes, really rethink the way that you could integrate the whole of the children's and learning services through inspection. We also did some things not very well at all that I was, you know, equally well responsible for leading.
Yeah. In terms of sounds like a huge challenge, you know, to integrate all those different areas into one. Obviously, not many people like change. How was it to bring all those maybe different working cultures together into one banner, if that makes sense? It was a lot of pushback at the time.
Yeah, and Ofsted was without doubt, so we stuck with the name Ofsted, but without doubt it was the highest profile brand. But the adult learning inspectorate actually had a very good reputation amongst its customers as well. So it wasn't just that there were internal conflicts, there were, you know, external perceptions that needed to be managed. And I think it's the same as managing any big change program. You set absolute clear vision of what you are going to get to. You have some abiding philosophies by which you want to get there, which is, as an inspectorate combined, we will inspect without fear and favour, but we will always do good as we go. And you give people things that they can galvanise around collectively. You have a very clear vision and mission of where you want to get to. You talk to people about the journey that they're going on and the steps that they're taking. You know, you do the usual sort of a bit of rebranding. You do a lot of the focus groups, the consultation, the clear setting of the objectives. And some things we did really well and some things we didn't do very well at all. I think the initial phase of bringing us all together, I think we actually did that really quite well. I think we did some of the initial inspection reviews really quite well. I think we did the initial savings very well. The rationalisation of buildings, I think we did very well. The revenue savings, I think we did very well by creating central teams. And then I think we did some stuff really not very well.
That's always the way. It's just a huge project as well. It's like you've got to have learning somewhere, haven't you? Our listeners are really interested to know, particularly around kind of sport and physical activity. And I don't know if it's maybe it was on your radar at the time, obviously, given that you were working on such, I guess, strategic or governance projects. But how, I guess, what's the perspective of sport and physical activity within Ofsted? Does that make sense? Because for us in this sector, we believe of the kind of transformational and transferable aspects of being physically active, but maybe that isn't communicated as well outside of our industry. I don't know if it's on the radar of Ofsted.
Certainly was, and it was certainly on my radar. And actually not just sport, but culture, arts, music,
definitely,
dance, the range of things that make us a whole human being, and the range of things that actually develop our skills as they develop us as people. And I think that Ofsted inspects what the government classes as important. Yeah. And while I was there, certainly at the time, sport was seen, this was, what was it? I'll probably get the date slightly wrong, but let's go 2005 to 2010, something like that. Sport and physical activity were seen as important. We were coming up to the Olympics. We knew we'd got it. We knew what we were doing. And it was more than that elite sport. It was that sense. So you were then required in schools to deliver a certain amount of PE. And I'm putting PE in inverted commas, but that physical activity. And Ofsted did actually inspect whether you were doing that and inspect how much of that was actually taking place as a part of what was at the time an agenda for the government, which was something, it was just diabolical and you couldn't expect it for toffee, but there was something around community cohesion and the part that schools could play in creating community cohesion. And we really felt the sports arts culture at the time played a massive part in creating that. So there were different ways that we could assess that in Ofsted. And I think that there was a value, school sports were valued. There was investment in it. There was, very strong school sports partnerships. There was a sense that this was something that went beyond just getting kids fit, but actually developed skills, developed competencies, developed opportunities, confidence. And I just don't feel I see that now from this government in the same way. And I think that there are pockets that would like to see that. I think we always can use the hooks. Commonwealth Games is the next hook that's coming up that we can use. But that focus, I really felt that from about 2011 onwards, I think really when we sort of scrapped school sports partnerships and things, it's difficult to see that there has been that same recognition. But I think it's also coincides with, if you look at the primary curriculum that was around in the noughties, the primary curriculum was very much focused on integrated learning. So we would do a lot of project-based teaching in primary that actually took a topic and taught every single subject through the exploration of that topic. And sport and art and music would be very much integrated into that alongside maths, literacy, science, geography, history, but you would do it in a project way, in an experiential way that actually developed skills. With the curriculum review and starting with primary and then moving to secondary and the GCSE review, we kind of completely scrapped what was emerging, which is a curriculum that you need for the 21st century and one that is recognised by the World Economic Forum and every employer you speak to, which is a curriculum that says, let's really develop your skills and let's support that by great content. And therefore, what we need to do is to look at those skills. Now, sport has an absolutely essential role in developing skills, whether that's teamwork, critical thinking, whether that's problem solving or resilience. sport, many others have an absolute critical role in developing those sorts of skills that we need. Even digital skills, it becomes a lot more interesting to actually look at tracking your performance and how you develop apps to do that. If you're actually performing, then you're just doing it in a theoretical basis. And what we need to do is we are running a busted flush of an education system, and we need to now flush it down the toilet and start again with a curriculum that focuses on skills and use excellent content and those skills development tools alongside that. So you've got the skills, the tools and the content, and you need to have the skills as the driver for that. And the tools, one of which would be sport. And until we do that, we're going to continue to produce a workforce for the 21st century employers that are not fit for purpose, and they don't have the skills that employers want.
How does that happen? I know we've got the curriculum review, and obviously I'm naive in the process, but it feels like, and we're looking at sport, I'm sure it happens in other subjects as well. You can loads of things that are kind of working, and you think this is fantastic, and then they disappear, they kind of disappear. Is that maybe through just trial and error, or trying something new and it didn't quite? I'm assuming there's a rationale behind the decisions, but how do you feel like we're on the right track in your mind, and then now we're not? How have we got here, if that makes sense?
I'm not in the least bit party political. I don't have a political party that I favour right now. I think I hold them all with equal contempt. But I do, having said that, really admire people who put themselves forward to deal with politics, because I've never had the bottle to do it. But I think what happens is that politics in and of itself can get in the way. So to show true party neutrality, the Tory party introduced a really amazing initiative, and that was called Safer Cities, which was probably the most successful initiative we have seen in reducing city crime and improving the quality of life for young people at risk of offending that this country has seen for decades. I mean, I can't go back beyond when I became a conscious sentient being. In my lifetime, that programme was absolutely phenomenal, and there is no doubt that it worked. It was scrapped by Labour when Labour came to power, and they didn't continue to invest in that really core, brilliantly thought out methodology for reducing crime and diverting young people away from crime into positive, productive lives, because it was a Tory idea.
Okay.
And I think, I'm trying to remember the politician that was very much promoted by people like Michael Heseltine, and it worked. And I could say the same about politically when the coalition, got into power in 2010, around that time. And so things that Labour had introduced that worked without a shadow of a doubt, and we need to bring back. Programs called Sure Start, addressing early years learning. Absolutely phenomenal. They were built on the back of stuff that was really good that had been introduced by the Tories. So family centres, they were built on the back of that, and really good examples of that were used as models. Tory government comes in and just scraps them. Absolute insanity. But the Tory government had at its heart a belief that it wanted to get rid of quangos. And they had a point that during their previous administration, an awful lot of non-ministerial non-departmental bodies or quangos had grown up, but they just went in and axed them. So some of the real casualties of that, school sports partnerships gone, they really worked, they were a casualty of that. And but for me, actually, the biggest loss was a quango called Vector, which was looking at how you use technology in education. And in scrapping that, we have lost a decade of learning at least.
Yeah,
and
exactly. When we just need it now in terms of technology. We could have had 10 years for sure.
And we are now 10 years behind the curve of the other countries, and you can see it. You can see it in Finland. You can see it in Singapore. We would have been outstripping them had we stuck with that. And I think the other thing that happened is there was a political whim. It took longer because the coalition thought about it. But Michael Gove, the coalition introduced some good stuff about looking at not just attainment, but progress. And that was a good thing to think about. It isn't all about the piece of paper you get at the end of the day. It's actually about the progress that you make, because not everybody starts from the same position. But Michael Gove had a really strong view that the 1950s model of education was a good thing, and that was his political view. And no amount of evidence, I worked with the man, would make him feel any different about it. And he was more interested in reforming the structural system, so introducing far greater academies, free schools, taking education away from central and local authorities, and bringing back very linear exam-based education systems, which were utterly flawed.
Also, it doesn't serve
not worth doing.
What do you feel about the that shift to academies as well? Maybe going off topic a little bit, and my curiosity, but the kind of shift to the academy model. Do you have a take on that from the LEA to academy model?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that there were a number of local education authorities who were very unsuccessful at tackling entrenched failure in schools. And so the lovely Adonis, now a lord, ordered honest, was pretty much the brainchild behind the academy movement. And what he believed is that you needed a system for failure. So if your mainstream local authority couldn't address failure, you needed to bring in something that would address failure. And actually a lot of the Tony Blair government was more right-wing than our current Tory government is. You know, it's bizarre, isn't it, if you're looking at the left-right perspective. I mean, there are a lot of Conservatives sitting out there going, could we please have a Conservative policy? Let me dig through all of this. I can't seem to find one. And certainly that move towards local ownership, which is what academies were about, with real private sector investment, which is what the initial programme was about, is 100% a Tory initiative. It just happened to be introduced by the Labour Party. We'll get business in to sort out failure. And that was what it was about. What happened then is Tories adopted it, not unsurprisingly, because it was a very right-wing kind of non-socialist solution to education, and sort of rolled it out. And what's happened is that you haven't really got the private sector drive in the same way you had in the early stages. And what happens is you've gone from very, very big managerial units. So Birmingham Local Education Authority, who, by the way, was not a dreadful education authority. They had pockets of real stubborn failure, but they were certainly not a dreadful education authority. Had, I think it was, I'm going to get the number slightly wrong, but 236 schools that they managed, with a head of that local education authority 10 years ago on probably about 85,000. The biggest academy trust has less than 100 schools in it, and those people are on 310,000 to lead it. And what you do is, and we saw it with housing associations, start as a really good idea, bring a bit of private sector, don't let just local authorities run social housing. Yeah. And what you end up with is these units that are much smaller than the public sector ever was, with people on much bigger salaries who think they're commercial, but they're not, because they've got government-backed guarantees for their income, which they can then utilise in a multitude of ways. And you just build in more and more managerial costs. So there is less and less money, Grenfell, education right now, for the teacher-pupil relationship, because there's more gone into management. That's the fundamental flaw. It's not actually that any particular academy chain is particularly bad.
Yeah, and I assume as well, in terms of the ones that are, I guess, geographically agnostic, like you said, it's supposed to be local ownership, but maybe you've got a trust that's managing schools all over the country, where you maybe miss out on that LEA, that local knowledge. Is there a tipping point as well then in terms of LEA sustainability as schools transition?
Yeah, very few LEAs have managed to sustain themselves. There are about, out of what started off at 150, there are probably 15 that have actually not been completely decimated by the academy movement, and they're still sustainable. And there were services that were the real casualties of this. Obviously, things like speech and language therapy could spin out and become sort of social enterprises or commercial entities in their own right and sell themselves back into academy chains. But the big areas that nobody could take on either as a sustainable social enterprise or commercial, that have, I think, been really lost to as a result of the decimation of LEAs. One is around excluded young people and young people who fall through the net. So the whole piece of managed moves, we've actually lost kids. The homeschooling movement, which is not actually homeschooling, it's I cannot be bothered to deal with you chasing anymore, so I'm going to say I've been told to say I'm homeschooling my kids so I can get them off of your dirty books academy, because I've got this relentless pressure on the performance as academy chains. So I think that's been one of the real losses. And then things like the Education Welfare Service. Very few local authorities still have education welfare services. These were people who were highly trained in supporting children and families who were having a difficulty in engaging in mainstream education. And they dealt with you whether you were ill or naughty, whether you were poor or, you might have had a sustained learning disability, but they looked after the welfare of you and your interface with schools. They worked in schools and they worked in the home. They didn't exist anymore, and we have a pandemic and we have not found a solution to manage a sustainable education strategy for those most vulnerable young people. And that's because we don't have a local education authority to support it. So
that's purely economics then, just because of the numbers out there to sustain that position. And that is that in the private sector at all, the welfare, or not? Is it just
it's gone? Because that was all funded through what used to be known as your top slice. So the local education authority would get £100 for all of the schools in their area, and they would give out 90 and keep 10 in this top slice. And they would provide those sort of services, which, because they were really centred on the need of the pupil, not the institution, were not then funded or bought back services by academies. A lot of the academy chains will tell you they do that, but as you said, some of them are geographically very dispersed, so it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I guess, we're going to go on to talk about RugbyWorks now, but I'm assuming the pandemic has kind of shone a light on this lack of services in certain areas as well.
Absolutely.
So in terms of looking at RugbyWorks, just moving on to that current role, talking to you at the moment, I can understand exactly why you wanted to get involved, but are you able to give us a bit of a, I guess, synopsis of kind of the program, origin story programs and the work that you're doing over there?
Absolutely. I mean, I started with Dallaglio RugbyWorks actually as a trustee, and then they had the chief exec left, and they had a period with sort of really good people stepping up and managing it internally, but they didn't necessarily want to go on and be the CEO. So when we advertised, I actually put my hat in the ring and stepped back from being a trustee, as I thought the sort of fallback, the safety net in case we didn't get anyone great to apply. And I'm sure brilliant people did apply, but the trustees decided to appoint me, much to my delight and surprise, because I really would have thought that you'd go for somebody a bit younger. So I'm just so excited. I've been there since the 1st of September to be able to lead RugbyWorks. And what we do is we work, our passion and our reason to get out of bed is to work with young people who have been failed by mainstream education. And that's either because they are sitting in the porter cabin down the end of the field, because that's where the internal exclusion, withy room, withdrawal room, all of that is, or they've actually been permanently excluded from pupil referral units, alternative provision, home tuition, whatever it might be. And those are the young people that we work with. And the reason we work with them is that if you've been excluded from school, you only have a 56% chance of getting employment, educational training post 18. If you haven't, you've got a 94% chance. And we want to change that and give you a 96% chance. We want to level that playing field. I'm not talking about the levelling up agenda. It's another thing to talk to Michael Gove about again another day.
Enough politics for today, yeah.
But that's what we exist to do. And we get to meet you as a young person by delivering directly in your pupil referral unit, where we deliver, it's kind of 4 cornerstones of what we do. One is absolutely around skills, and all those skills that sport bring, everything I've already talked about, leading to a sports leaders qualification. So there's that sort of trying to underpin it back with actually, learning and producing academic evidence isn't totally ghastly. You could think about how you might be able to do this in your English and maths as well. A very sort of traditional skills-based learning program. We really focus on raising aspirations, so we have incredible links with employers that are actually going to give young people who possibly lived in very deprived backgrounds, who don't have parents who've worked, who don't have parents who have, up in the top 3 tiers of social bracket job opportunities. So we use those employers to run career tasting days, work experience, virtual talks from the likes of the House of Garrod, now I believe called Garrod, who make jewellery for the royal family, to the Goring Hotel, Land Rover, Rolls Royce. So really big employers who are aspirational for these young people. And then we do all the stuff you'd expect, employment workshops, the skills you need. And then guess what? We use rugby as a hook to get you involved. So I have a huge emphasis on physical fitness, physical improvement training. But that links back to how can we now get you into a club so you can sustain your enjoyment and actually get to meet new people who maybe aren't in your area. And then obviously, like every charity, not just now, but before, a real emphasis on mental health and mental well-being, and running a series of workshops around how you can try and keep yourself mentally healthy, because boy, have we made it difficult for young people to do that during this pandemic. And then we work with you outside of your school gates and outside of your school timetable. Very specifically, our target is 3 till 6 p.m. because that's when young people are most at risk. But we might be using community facilities then, not just the school grounds. And then obviously holiday and outside of term time provision, which honestly a lot of the time is as much about getting a meal and a sports into young people as it is about our 4 cornerstones.
On the employability side, I actually think it's probably, I don't know what your experiences and feedback's been, but it's almost a benefit. The skills are coming from obviously academics is important, but now what employers are looking for is that kind of practical skill, and that if you've got that resilience, obviously you've been through something and can channel it in the right way, it's always going to be a positive for employers, I think.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're spot on. And one of the things that was one of the big levers for me wanting to be the CEO of Dallaglio RugbyWorks, thanks to a very generous philanthropist, Dallaglio RugbyWorks got some seed funding to develop an app for young people that actually helps them capture their life experience and map that against the skills that young people need for the workplace and employers want. And they're able to set their own goals and use their own lived experience as evidence of achieving those skills. Because actually getting mum off the floor in a drunken heap and getting her to a GP or getting a GP to her and getting your siblings to school shows incredible resilience, brilliant organisational skills, risk-taking abilities, a whole range of skills that actually in conventional education you would never get to showcase.
Exactly.
But those are the skills that employers want. So this app allows you to upload your own evidence and to map that back to the World Economic Skills Matrix that employers have identified that they want globally. And being an app, it also allows you to develop your digital skills, which is one of the biggest skills you need. And we also can facilitate, the core skills, reading, writing, and doing some maths through the app. And that is our way and young people also get to set their own goals and track their own progress. It's in its prototype stage. We call it a minimum viable product at the moment. But I think it is something that is going to become a mainstay of all organisations like Dallaglio RugbyWorks, because that's what we all want to do. And an app like this allows young people to also own their own progress and own their own data. So they're not being done unto, they're actually at the nexus of their own control.
It's almost like that version 2 of the record of achievement you saw as a kid, but it's actual the practical one, life skill. That to me as well, it's kind of like every parent's dilemma, isn't it? So you want the best for your kids and you want to make sure protect them, but then there's always, you could go the other way where they don't have any life experience, where they're just coddled and academically perfect high flyers, but then they've got kind of had no challenge, if you know what I mean. It's difficult to generate that or create that. But I'm going off on a tangent. In terms of the model, do you work directly with schools? And I know you work across those 8 different regions, but are you deploying staff into schools, and is that regional, or how's it seem to work?
So across those 8 regions, we get to meet our young people by deploying our staff directly into schools, pupil referral units, alternative provision. We also actually work in young offender institutions, and we go directly in. And the model is that we will work with you there, but we will then also look at what we can provide in terms of doing rugby training, skills workshops, etc., between the hours of 3 and 6. So we definitely go into the schools. That's where we meet you. That's where we get to know you, because young people who've been excluded from school, guess what? They're not the sort that necessarily go to youth clubs or go to rugby clubs or other sports clubs. So we've got to go to where you're at. And pupil referral units, even if you're only there 1 day a week, you probably come if you know Dallaglio RugbyWorks is going in. So that's how we build the relationships. But exactly the same as every single organisation that you work with and every single organisation listening, the thing that gets the young person and makes them want to believe in themselves and give it a go is the relationship they've got with that coach or mentor or key worker or whatever title the agency might have given them, or the charity or the organisation. And what we do is we build on those relationships to exactly the same as every other organisation to ensure longevity of a relationship, because the more that the young people stay with us, and that's again with the app, it is their coach or their mentor that they've met in real time that they are talking with on the app. It's not standalone technology, it's technology that's facilitated by a human relationship. We are absolutely powered by people and technology. The two are hand in hand. And so then you stay with young people potentially for life.
No, I love that. In terms of the business model, all foundations and non-profits can be hand to mouth in certain situations. Are you offering your services commercially, or is it kind of based on grants and things like that? And how do you sustain the organisation?
I just wish it really was pennies from heaven, but it isn't. It's hard work, isn't it? Getting the money in, really hard work. The statutory sector do pay for us to go in, but it's not a full cost recovery basis.
Right, okay.
So I would say they make a contribution for us to be in their schools, because they obviously really want us in the schools, and so they make a contribution for us to be there. And I think that's the same with the vast majority of sport for development, sport for good charities that work in schools and the statutory sector. The statutory sector always make a contribution to you being there, but it's never full cost recovery. So you've then got to do. And then obviously we work between 3 and 6 where there is no statutory sector that can pay for that. And so, we do the same as everybody else. Trust and foundation grant applications, hard work, really skilled to do that, clearly not being driven by me. Dallaglio RugbyWorks does a lot of events because we've got a high profile founder in Lawrence Dallaglio who, is still contemporary enough that people want to go to events that he facilitates and hosts. So we do a lot of high profile events that always, there's always a net profit, but they're quite costly and high risk and take some organisation. And then we work with corporates and them wanting to sponsor, either because they passionately believe in what we're doing, or because we really fit with their CSR program, or because they really want to benefit from a new audience of potential employees. or because of all of those things. And then we do have very lucky to have some high net worth individuals who want to support us because they believe in giving something back, because they're true philanthropists. So it is across the board. People give us money. It is, if there is a way of making money, yep, we'll do it. We'll give it a go. Thank you very much.
No, definitely. Well, like I said, the demand's so high at the moment for what you're offering. It's important that you can sustain it. So yeah, just moving on, I'm really conscious of your time as well. I have a few questions, just a bit more personal questions in terms of how you operate. Do you have any daily kind of habits or routines that you've put in place to keep you performing at a high level or being able to lead at the level you're at?
Probably have a cup of tea every day.
Yeah.
I love a cup of tea. Oh gosh, habits. No, I'm trying to not daily habits. No. I wish I was going to say, I'm one of those people that does yoga for 20 minutes every morning, but I'm just not. When the opportunity arises, of course I go to the gym. And walking, I've got a dog. Yeah. There you go. I'm going to stick with walking. I have to do that every day. I've got a dog. I've got the most glorious dog on the planet.
Yeah, that's the classic de-stressor, the dog walk, for sure.
Absolutely. And she's my little rescue puppy. She's gorgeous. Puppy. She's 12. She's not really a puppy anymore, are you? What my daily habits that keep me fresh? I'm a mum, and I've privately fostered a number of young teenagers myself. And I think the thing that keeps my energy up is that so far I have been privileged to be surrounded in my own home by young people. That is an absolute privilege, and it keeps your energy levels up.
Yeah, the house's energy must be strong, positive energy.
And so I suppose I'm going to have to find, when they all eventually leave home, I'm either going to have to find other young people to bring into my home, or I'm going to have to find other ways of keeping my energy up, which I might be better placed then to tell you about my daily routines and my yoga every morning or something. Yeah. But no, it's my dog and my kids and my foster kids that keep my energy up.
That's great. Just the last question for me, and this we always do the reflective one, where if you could go back to when you started out, to say when you were just in college there and starting out, and you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be that you'd go back and tell your younger self?
Probably it's those things you realise as you get older. I would go back and tell myself, you are as smart as you're ever going to be. Really enjoy it. You are super bright and firing on all cylinders. Post-menopausal, I am so dense and so daft now. And I really miss my brighter self. I would tell myself that I'm more energetic. You just value this time. But I think I always did. I mean, I don't have regrets. I'd probably go back and tell myself, really be careful what you put on social media, because it might end up on the front page of the Daily Mail. That happened to me. Things like that. I would warn myself of, but that wasn't my much younger self. I was a fully fledged grown up with kids when I shot my own foot off there.
Yeah, I think anyone can make that mistake though with social media, to be fair.
So yeah. Those sorts of things. And I think, if I'm to reflect on what has kept me going, I'm a resilient bird. And I have been blessed with the fact that most days of the week I wake up and I think I'm all right, and I wake up reasonably happy. And I don't have to fight my own demons anymore. And if I could give every young person I've ever known a gift, it would be to tell them to get out of their own way and don't fight those demons. They don't exist. They're only in your head. Stop giving yourself a hard time. Like yourself and you will succeed.
Perfect. Zenna, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you giving up so much and went over slightly, but we will link all the great work that you're doing with RugbyWorks in the show notes, and anyone who wants to get involved, I'm sure will be reaching out.
Fantastic. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.